Well, there's an enormous irony that we went from having a national campaign of just say no to drugs to a national campaign of just say yes to the very same drugs when prescribed by a physician. It's as if the writing of the prescription somehow changes the basic quality and impact of the drug when it does not. We now have follow-up studies showing that the routine use of Ritalin causes an increased use of cocaine and cigarettes in young adulthood.
For the sake of our children, I implore each of you to be unyielding and inflexible in your opposition to drugs.
The definition of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is really a collection of behaviors that annoy teachers and require attention. This is from the official Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's put out by the American Psychiatric Association. It is the source of the diagnosis for ADHD. Number one symptom is often fidgets with hands or feet or squirms in seat. The second one is often leaves seat in classroom. The third one is often runs about or climbs excessively. Often blurts out answers before questions have been completed. Often has difficulty awaiting turn. Often fails to give close attention to details or makes careless mistakes in schoolwork. Often has difficulty sustaining attention in tasks or play activities. Often doesn't seem to listen when spoken to directly. Often loses things necessary for tasks or activities, e.g. toys, school's assignments, pencils, books. These are diagnoses to control classrooms. So literally, educators, psychologists, psychiatrists got together and they developed a concept that behaviors that require attention in the classroom shouldn't be given attention, the children should be labeled. All the teacher knows is that 1 out of her 30 kids is doing this, or 2 out of 30 is doing that. And now she's been taught in a seminar, which she doesn't know was presented by a drug company-sponsored doctor, and tells her that that's not her fault. She's not got to learn how to get everybody's attention. She's got a diagnosis she can work with instead.
You can understand a teacher in a class of increasingly crowded classes today, that we have 30 or 40, that they don't want to pay attention to one kid or two kids that are causing a lot of problem. So schools are a big recommender of psychiatric drugs for kids, and sometimes will not even let kids come to school unless they're put on some kind of medication.
Boys and girls, how would you like to show some of the ways we know of being quiet? Yes! All right, bring your chairs up.
Oh, moving chairs will certainly be noisy. Well, there is a quiet way to move chairs, isn't there? There wasn't much noise at all. No one was disturbed.
This little paragraph tells us that we've forsaken our kids, that we will subject them to boring, repetitive, monotonous, this is their words, repetitive, monotonous situations by diagnosing and drugging them. And we won't provide them close supervision, appropriate rewards for behavior, novelty, or even, quote, interesting activities. What kind of disease? Do you think multiple sclerosis goes away when you have an interesting activity? You think your brain tumor goes away when you're in a novel situation? This is not a disease. This is a condition of teachers, parents, and psychiatrists more than it is a condition of our children. This diagnosis tells you much more about us than about the children.
I don't know what the hell it's doing in their brains, but it is making a formally questioning child turn into a completely complicit child. And that's quite a trick to do to a human brain. I don't know how it works, but it works.
And remember, there's a country called England. They're hardly a third world country. They have banned the use of these drugs with kids and adolescents for two reasons. The first is that they're not very effective with kids. There's never been any evidence that they work with kids. That hasn't prevented us from putting tens of thousands of kids on these drugs, because the drug companies have basically lied to doctors. Number two, they dramatically increase suicide and murder.
A disturbing new study out today shows a sharp jump in the number of young Americans committing suicide. Almost 2,000 young people aged 19 and under killed themselves in 2004. That's an increase of more than 18% in the rate of teen suicide from the year before.
Well, when you cause brain dysfunction in a human being, it often leads to suicidal or violent behavior. We now know from clinical trials, and the FDA has admitted that the antidepressants cause suicidal behavior in children. I've been saying it for 10 years. The FDA has finally acknowledged it this year. But the same process also produces violence. Suicide and violence are cut from the same cloth, and they both come from causing brain dysfunction and disinhibition and a lack of self-control in kids. And Eric Harris, probably the leader of the shootings at Columbine, was definitely taking Luvox. I was a medical expert in 2 cases in Columbine, so I've had access to data, and it's very clear that on autopsy, Eric Harris had an effective level of Luvox in his blood. Now, if you just look at the label for Luvox, which is an adult antidepressant that got marketed to children for obsessive-compulsive disorder, but it's basically an adult antidepressant. And if you look at the label for Luvox, it tells you that in their small study of children, 4% of them became manic on this drug. And mania is this potentially violent, out-of-control behavior. And I know that Eric Harris developed his severe disorder, his violent, hateful, destructive attitudes while taking this drug. That is very clear from his history. And it's clear that he took the drug probably on the very day he committed these acts, because he had a significant level in his bloodstream, and the drug, has a half-life of only about a day, less than a day.
A disturbing number of recent young shooters were either on antidepressants or were withdrawing from antidepressants. 12-year-old Christopher Pittman on Luvox and withdrawing from Paxil when he killed his paternal grandparents. 14-year-old Elizabeth Bush on Prozac when she blasted away at fellow students in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, wounding 1. 18-year-old Jason Hoffman on Effexor and Celexa when he opened fire at his California high school, wounding 5. 15-year-old Sean Cooper on a mix of antidepressants when he shot at students at his Idaho high school. 15-year-old TJ Solomon also on a mix of antidepressants when he aimed his shotgun at classmates in Conyers, Georgia, wounding 6. And 17-year-old Eric Harris on Luvox when he and his partner Dylan Klebold killed 12 classmates and a teacher at Columbine.